one single empire controlled more than a quarter of the entire global economy. European monarchs lived on rumors of its wealth, calling it the Golden Sparrow. The sheer scale of this opulence is etched into the stone they left behind. The Mughals commanded enough capital to build the world's most expensive monuments, like the Taj Mahal, simply to commemorate personal grief. But by 1857, the same bloodline had reached a pathetic conclusion. The last emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, was homeless and begging British officers for his life. In a final, calculated humiliation, the British executed his sons and served their severed heads to him on a breakfast tray. History often claims the British simply outgunned the locals with superior technology to steal a continent. However, the timeline suggests something else. The British didn't conquer the Mughals. They bought an empire that was already bleeding out from a self-inflicted suicide.
To understand how, we have to perform a historical autopsy on the 3 diseases that hollowed out this superpower from the inside. The first fatal disease was a missing piece of the Mughal DNA. Unlike their contemporaries, the Mughals never established a legal framework for a peaceful transfer of power. Their succession law was a single brutal sentence, Takht ya Takhta, the throne or the funeral. This absence of law transformed every royal funeral into a survival lottery. Brothers marched against brothers with the understanding that a battlefield defeat meant a public execution or a lifetime of imprisonment. Aurangzeb provided the ultimate example of this ruthlessness. To seize the crown in 1658, he executed his brothers and locked his own father, Shah Jahan, in this exact tower at Agra Fort. The man who built the Taj Mahal spent his final 8 years gazing at it through the bars of a royal prison. These generational wars drained the state treasury and systematically slaughtered the empire's most capable military generals, who died fighting their own kin instead of defending the borders. This cycle bred a permanent culture of paranoia. Kings lived in terror of their sons, and ministers feared their own colleagues. Long before a foreign enemy fired a shot, the core trust required to run a state had already rotted away. When Aurangzeb took the throne, he pushed the Mughal borders to their largest territorial extent. But in doing so, he triggered a logistical crisis the empire could not survive. This was strategic overstretch. Aurangzeb spent 26 years personally leading endless guerrilla wars in South India. He poured the empire's wealth into these distant battles, leaving the administration in Delhi to decay into corruption and neglect. While they fixated on capturing every inch of land, the Mughals suffered from total sea blindness. Despite their wealth, they never built a navy, remaining oblivious as European powers mastered maritime warfare and anchored unchallenged right off their shores. This blind spot led to a devastating mistake in 1615. Jahangir granted a British ambassador named Thomas Roe permission to trade, assuming a small group of merchants posed no threat to a land-based superpower. He unknowingly welcomed a corporate parasite. While the Mughals exhausted their resources fighting land wars with 16th-century tactics, they signed the trade permits that allowed a foreign company to systematically dismantle the state's economic monopoly from within. By the time Aurangzeb died in 1707, the treasury was empty. The empire fell to puppet kings like Muhammad Shah Rangila, who famously ignored reports of border invasions to focus on dance and poetry. In 1739, the Iranian king Nadir Shah entered Delhi and destroyed whatever Mughal dignity remained. In a single day, his troops killed 30,000 people and swept the royal treasury clean, hauling away the peacock throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. An empty treasury meant the death of loyalty. Without money to pay salaries, the Mughal army dissolved. A might-is-right culture took hold, where Indian soldiers fought strictly for whichever master provided a reliable paycheck. The East India Company stepped into this void as the region's ultimate paymaster. By offering a solid payroll and modern discipline, they hired the best local fighters to build a corporate army. The British didn't need to defeat the Mughals in a grand war of civilizations. They used an army that was 90% Indian to quietly buy a bankrupt nation from its own unpaid citizens. The 1857 rebellion was a disorganized, desperate gasp that came a century too late. The uprising was crushed, the last Mughal king was exiled, and the Red Fort fell silent. But while the kings were removed, their civilization proved harder to erase. Mughal identity still defines the subcontinent's language, its cuisine, and the fashion of its elite. However, the real inheritance was the court culture that allowed the empire to fall. For 300 years, the Mughal system prioritized personal flattery and royal recommendations over institutional merit. Power wasn't built on laws, it was built on access to the person of the king. This created a behavioral blueprint that still mirrors modern institutions. We see it in systems where a personal connection carries more weight than a resume, and in political structures that exist to serve a single personality rather than a constitutional process. We call this the Mughal virus. It is the lingering habit of behaving like subjects waiting for a messiah rather than citizens building a state. The rise and fall of the Mughals is a mirror. It proves that no amount of wealth can save a state that refuses to cure its own internal rot.